In a world shaped by faith, war, and impossible ambition, the Knights Templar rose from humble beginnings to become one of the most mysterious and powerful military orders in history. Close your eyes and let the world of the present slowly fade away. Let the hum of the room become the distant echo of wind across desert sand, and the quiet rhythm of your breathing turn into the footsteps of pilgrims climbing ancient stone paths. Tonight, you fall asleep not to imagination but to a true story, one of devotion and war, of sacrifice and ambition, of faith becoming steel and prayer turning into the sound of clashing swords. This is the epic journey of the Knights Templar, the most mysterious military order of the medieval world, a brotherhood that rose from obscurity to command the fear and respect of kings and sultans alike, and whose legacy, though broken by betrayal, still whispers through the corners of history. The story begins with silence, not the silence of peace, but the silence that settles after battle, when smoke rises from the ruins of cities, and the victorious look upon the holy land they have taken, only to realize the world ahead is far more difficult than the war that brought them there. In 1099, when the First Crusade ended with the shocking conquest of Jerusalem, Christian soldiers found themselves as the unlikely rulers of a fragile kingdom surrounded by enemies and threatened by hunger, distance, and distrust. The victory stunned Europe. Songs were written, sermons preached, and stories told across villages and royal courts alike. People believed this triumph was the will of God, but those left behind to protect the holy city knew that victory was only the beginning. The Crusader kingdom of Jerusalem was a miracle built on sand. Pilgrims, filled with spiritual hunger and hope for eternal salvation, began traveling from Europe across seas and deserts to reach the holy sites where Christ once walked. But outside the stone walls of Jerusalem, the world was perilous. Bandits haunted the narrow roads, raiders watched the mountain passes, factions clashed for control, and the new rulers of the Holy Land were stretched far too thin to protect anyone. Stories of pilgrims being robbed, kidnapped, or killed sent shockwaves through the Christian world. The roads to Jerusalem became a path of fear. From this fear arose a strange and radical idea. What if warriors could take the vows of monks? What if humility and poverty could exist beside discipline and the sword? What if the defense of the innocent could be transformed into a sacred duty? In the year 1119, on these dusty, dangerous roads, a small group of 9 knights led by a man named Hugues de Payens pledged themselves to a mission unlike any the world had seen, to protect pilgrims, not for money, not for fame, but for God. These men had no idea that their humble vow would ignite a force that would reshape medieval history. They lived with nothing, owned nothing, and shared everything. Their few horses were shared between riders. They slept on hard floors, ate simple meals, and prayed together by candlelight. They were given a headquarters by King Baldwin II, not in some distant corner, but in one of the most sacred places in the world, the Temple Mount, believed to be the ancient site of Solomon's great temple. From this headquarters came their name, the Poor Knights of the Temple of Solomon, soon known simply as the Knights Templar. In their earliest days, they were unknown, unremarkable, a small brotherhood performing a dangerous duty. But rumors spread through the Holy Land, and then across the seas. Word reached Europe of strange knights who prayed like monks and fought like lions. People imagined tall figures in white cloaks marked with a red cross, humble, fearless, unstoppable. They became a symbol of purity in a world of corruption, a beacon for nobles seeking divine purpose. Donations began flowing from thousands of miles away. Gold from kings, land from lords, livestock from villagers, and coins from peasants who would never see Jerusalem, yet believed in the mission of those who defended it. Their transformation was swift and astonishing. A handful of knights became hundreds. Hundreds became thousands. They developed rules, strict, uncompromising rules that shaped them into something the world had never seen before, an army without personal ambition, united under a vow, guided by faith instead of fortune. They fought not for kings but for Christendom. Their discipline was unmatched. Their charges were legendary, straight into enemy lines, shields locked, swords raised, without fear of death, for they believed dying in service to God ensured eternal salvation. And yet, the strength of the Templars did not rest solely on the battlefield. Behind the clash of steel was an unseen world of organization. They became masters of logistics, building networks of command, supply lines, and strategic fortresses across the Holy Land. Their wealth grew not from conquest but from innovation. They created early systems of credit, allowing travelers to deposit gold in Europe and withdraw its value in Jerusalem. They built granaries, farms, vineyards, ports, and estates that supported their armies abroad. This combination, faith, military discipline, and economic power, made the Templars into something unprecedented, a spiritual army with worldly influence. And when their white cloaks marked with the red cross appeared on the battlefield, friends found courage and enemies felt dread. Over time, their story intertwined with legends, whispers of hidden treasures, of sacred relics protected from the corruption of kings, of secret knowledge found beneath the ruins of Solomon's temple. And while the truth is often simpler than the myths that surround it, these stories grew because the Templars themselves seemed to stand at the edge of mystery. The rise of the Knights Templar is one of the most remarkable transformations in history. From 9 men with nothing, to a brotherhood that shaped the destiny of crusades, influenced the politics of kings, and built the foundations of financial systems we still use today. Their story is a tale of devotion and the dangers of power. Their mission was holy. Their vows were pure. Their legend eternal. The origins of the Knights Templar rise from a world that is difficult to imagine today, a place where kingdoms were built on the strength of belief, where the word of a priest could send armies across continents, and where salvation was something people hoped to earn through pilgrimage and sacrifice. After the First Crusade ended with the improbable conquest of Jerusalem in 1099, Europe fell into a state of fervent celebration. Churches rang their bells for days. Priests preached that Providence had spoken through the blades of Christian soldiers. Families of the fallen believed their loved ones had gained eternal glory. Kings who had supported the crusade, even indirectly, boasted that their decisions had been guided by heaven. The triumph of Jerusalem created a powerful emotion across Europe. Hope. People believed anything was possible if done in the name of God. This hope sent waves of pilgrims to the Holy Land, poor peasants selling everything they owned for the chance to pray at Christ's tomb, wealthy nobles seeking spiritual redemption, and knights who had missed the crusade but wished to serve at least once in their lives. But what pilgrims imagined was not what they found. The city might have been in Christian hands, but the surrounding lands were unpredictable and treacherous. Every mile of the road held danger. The Crusader kingdom was a fragile fortress in a hostile landscape. Armies of the First Crusade had returned home, leaving only limited garrisons struggling to defend the newly claimed territories. The forces of the surrounding Muslim leaders were not broken, they were reorganizing. The politics of the Holy Land were complex. Local tribes competed for influence, nobles fought over land, and alliances shifted constantly. Bandits saw pilgrims as easy prey. Caravans were attacked for their supplies and gold. Stories reached Europe of entire groups of pilgrims disappearing into ravines, their bodies left along the roadside as warnings. The joy of victory was slowly turning into the fear of loss, and something had to change. The kings and nobles of Jerusalem understood a simple truth: the holy city could not survive without safe roads and safe people. It was in this moment of uncertainty that a small group of knights offered a radical solution. In 1119, a French knight named Hugues de Payens gathered 8 other men, most from noble families, all experienced soldiers. They chose a mission simple in words but immense in difficulty: to protect pilgrims traveling through the Holy Land. Their idea did not come from grand strategy but from sincere belief. They pledged themselves not to a king or lord, but to God. They took the same vows as monks: poverty, obedience, chastity, and combined them with the discipline of warriors. They became something the medieval world had never seen: soldiers who owned nothing, fought for no kingdom, and sought no reward except spiritual salvation. There is a deep symbolism in their earliest seal showing 2 knights riding a single horse. Some see this as a mark of humility: they were so poor they needed to share mounts. Others interpret it as a message: 2 brothers, 1 purpose, shared burden. Whatever the meaning, the image became an icon, a reminder that the Templars emerged not from wealth but sacrifice. King Baldwin II of Jerusalem recognized the potential of this small group. He granted them headquarters in the royal palace on the Temple Mount, a location heavy with spiritual history. To Europeans, this was the most sacred ground outside the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. This headquarters gave the knights a name: the Poor Knights of Christ and the Temple of Solomon, eventually shortened to Knights Templar. From this sacred site, they patrolled dangerous roads, escorted travelers, and defended small fortresses. At first, they had little influence, but God has a way in medieval minds of magnifying humble beginnings. Rumors spread through ports and markets: brave knights in white cloaks fighting to defend the weak. Templars became symbols of purity in a world known for corruption. Priests praised them from pulpits. Bishops sent letters celebrating their vows. Stories, often exaggerated, painted them as holy warriors untouched by the greed of nobility. Their rise truly began when they were endorsed by the Church. In 1129, at the Council of Troyes, the Templars were officially recognized as a military order by ecclesiastical authority. The council was guided by one of the most influential priests of the age, Bernard of Clairvaux, whose support transformed the Templars from a small patrol group into a religious institution with global reach. Bernard did not simply approve the order, he defined it. He wrote their rule, their code of conduct, their spiritual philosophy. Bernard described them as knights who were fearless because they did not fear death, men whose souls were already offered to God. His words spread across Europe like fire in dry grass. Nobles who might never have gone to battle saw an opportunity to join something divine. Landowners donated estates to support the soldiers of Christ. Wealth flowed into the order from every corner of Europe. Suddenly, the Knights Templar were no longer poor. They became wealthy in land, equipment, and resources, not for personal gain, but to support their mission. Their vow of poverty remained individual. The order itself became rich. This distinction is important. No Templar owned anything personally. Everything belonged to the Brotherhood. Their farms fed soldiers in Jerusalem. Their vineyards provided wine for garrisons. Their horses, armor, and fortresses were shared. And as their network expanded across continents, from France to England, Portugal to Hungary, the Templars developed systems to manage their wealth that were astonishingly advanced for the medieval period. Pilgrims could deposit money in Europe and receive a written note from the Templars, allowing them to withdraw funds safely when they reached the Holy Land. This eliminated the risk of carrying gold on dangerous roads. In practice, the Templars created one of the earliest forms of banking. Their notes of credit traveled faster than ships, and their reputation ensured trust. While monks prayed for salvation, Templars prayed for strength. They trained relentlessly, learning to fight as a single body, horses moving like one, shields forming a wall, lances aligned in perfect formation. Their most terrifying tactic became the Templar charge, a fast, focused, devastating assault designed to break enemy lines through shock and precision. To retreat was forbidden. To surrender was shame. They were known as the first to enter battle and the last to leave it. Their belief in paradise after death gave them courage that frightened enemies and inspired allies. The Templar banner, the Bucient, black above white, symbolized humility and purity, sin below grace. When it waved above the battlefield, Crusader soldiers rallied, believing God fought beside them. By the mid-12th century, the Knights Templar were no longer road guardians. They were the elite soldiers of the Crusader states, protectors of castles, commanders of armies, and guardians of the most sacred places on earth. Their mission had evolved, but their spirit remained rooted in that first vow on the dangerous roads of Jerusalem, to protect, to serve, and to offer their lives without hesitation. And as their influence grew, so did the complexity of their world, setting the stage for triumphs, tragedies, and conflicts that would shape the next 2 centuries. Tonight, as the world around you softens into sleep, let their stories surround you. You are entering the vast deserts of ancient kingdoms, the stone halls of forgotten castles, and the quiet chapels where men prayed with swords beside them. The epic journey of the Knights Templar begins. The rise of the Knights Templar was not the work of fate alone, it was shaped by extraordinary individuals, men whose conviction created a brotherhood unlike anything the medieval world had ever seen. Their story is not a tale of nameless soldiers but a narrative carried on the shoulders of visionaries, mystics, commanders, and diplomats who transformed a modest act of protection into a military and spiritual empire. To understand the Templars is to understand the lives of those who built them, men defined by both deep faith and unbreakable discipline, whose decisions carved their legacy into the stone of history. At the center of this transformation stands Hugues de Payens, the first Grand Master, a man whose leadership combined humility with strategic brilliance. He was not a king, nor even a great lord, but a knight of noble birth from Champagne in France. Yet his influence reached across continents. Hugues possessed a rare dual gift, the courage of a warrior and the diplomatic mind of a statesman. He understood that the Templars could not simply exist on the roads of Jerusalem, they needed legitimacy, they needed structure, and most importantly, they needed the blessing of the Church. Hugues spent years traveling through Europe, meeting nobles, audiences with bishops, and seeking the approval of the most powerful spiritual authority of the age. His mission was not to gather wealth, but to gather trust. He promised kings that supporting the Templars would earn divine favor. He convinced priests that a military order could be a vessel for salvation. And he persuaded ordinary people that their donations would protect pilgrims and defend the holy city. Yet even Hugues' diplomacy would have meant nothing without Bernard of Clairvaux, the monk whose words breathed life into the soul of the order. Bernard was not just respected, he was revered. In a time when the Church shaped everything from law to warfare, Bernard's voice carried the weight of heaven. He lived in simplicity, his body weakened by fasting, his mind sharpened through contemplation. His spirituality did not reside in gilded cathedrals but in a personal and profound relationship with God. When he met Hugues, he saw in the Templars an idea he had been waiting for, knights guided not by greed or glory, but by devotion. Bernard believed faith must be defended, and he believed the Temple Knights were the instruments of that defense. It was Bernard who wrote the Latin Rule, the document that defined the Templars' daily life, from how they ate their food to how they fought in battle. The rule demanded obedience, banned luxury, and crushed ego. No knight could show personal wealth. No knight could choose his own path. The order came before everything, even family, even life. Through Bernard's writing, the Templar identity became clear, a knight who feared no blade because he believed death was only the doorway to salvation, a humble warrior who rode into war with the quiet confidence of a monk walking into prayer. He described them as fearless knights, as gentle as lambs and as fierce as lions, a paradox that enchanted Europe. People believed the Templars were blessed. Donations poured in. Land across Europe became Templar property. Hughes had built the foundation, Bernard made it eternal, but the early years of the order were not defined by spiritual philosophy alone, they were marked by constant struggle, danger, and bloodshed. The Crusader states, though proud, were surrounded on every side by powerful adversaries. Local Muslim leaders did not see the Crusaders as holy liberators, they saw them as invaders occupying sacred land. And among these leaders rose figures of extraordinary skill, men who would become the Templars' greatest rivals. One of the earliest and most dangerous was Imad ad-Din Zengi, a brilliant Turkish commander who united regional powers and struck devastating blows against the Crusader strongholds. His siege of Edessa in 1144 shocked the Christian world and revealed a painful truth: the Templars could not hold the Holy Land through devotion alone, they needed allies, strategy, and numbers. The loss of Edessa triggered the Second Crusade, a campaign that exposed the fragile unity of Christendom. European kings argued. Supplies failed. Failures multiplied. The crusade ended in disappointment, and the Templars, though respected for their courage, were forced to face a grim reality: they were fighting a war they could not win alone. Yet defeat did not break them. Instead, they evolved. They strengthened their fortifications, building massive castles like Safed and Bagras, designed to hold against enormous armies. They reinforced roads, developed supply routes, and trained relentlessly. Their discipline became their shield. Their unity became their weapon. The Templars also faced challenges from within. Their rise attracted envy from secular lords and resentment from rival knightly orders, notably the Knights Hospitaller, another powerful military brotherhood whose mission began with caring for the sick but expanded into warfare. The two orders shared a goal, but their ambitions often collided. They competed for influence in royal courts, for control of fortresses, for donations from nobles. Their rivalry shaped the politics of the Crusader states. Kings played them against each other to gain advantage. Yet when the battlefield called, the rivalry faded. Templar and Hospitaller knights fought shoulder to shoulder, forming the elite core of Crusader armies. Despite their growing strength, the Templars were forced to confront their most formidable enemy in the late 12th century, Saladin. Unlike many leaders before him, Saladin did not rely on fragmented alliances. He united Egypt and Syria under his authority, creating a powerful and cohesive Muslim force. He was respected for his honor, feared for his tactical brilliance, and admired even by Christian chroniclers for his humility. Saladin understood the Templars' value. He knew they were the heart of Crusader resistance. To defeat the Crusader states, he needed to break the orders, especially the Templars. The conflict between Saladin and the Templars became legendary, culminating in the catastrophic Battle of Hattin in 1187, where Crusader forces were cut off from water, surrounded by desert heat, and systematically destroyed. The Templars fought to the last man. Those who survived were executed. Saladin believed their devotion made them too dangerous to live. The fall of Jerusalem after Hattin sent shockwaves through Europe. People shouted blame and praise in the same breath. The Templars had held the line with unmatched bravery, yet their faith and rigid tactics prevented retreat. Their greatest strength, unyielding discipline, had become their weakness. Yet even in defeat, the legend grew. Tales spread of Templar knights refusing water so their brothers could drink, of wounded men still praying as the sun set on the battlefield. The loss of Jerusalem changed the course of the order. Their original mission, protecting pilgrims on the road to the Holy City, was impossible without the Holy City itself. And so, the Templars adapted again. They shifted their mission from road protection to fortress warfare. Their castles became the backbone of Crusader defense. They built Croix de Chevaliers, a fortress so massive it was said to be invincible. They learned diplomacy, forging treaties when war alone could not protect the Holy Land. They became not just warriors, but political actors, advisors to kings, supporters of royal claims, and bankers to princes. Through victory and defeat, alliance and rivalry, the Templars proved one truth: their power did not come from their numbers, nor from their weapons, but from their unity. Each knight was a single thread, but together they formed a tapestry stronger than any individual could ever be. Their early struggles shaped them, hardened them, and prepared them for the great turning point that would define their destiny, and ultimately lead to their downfall. The turning point in the history of the Knights Templar was not a gradual shift but a brutal and sudden collision between faith, ambition, and the unforgiving reality of war. Until this moment in history, the Templars had been the shield of the Crusader states, the disciplined core of every major battle, the guardians of sacred roads, and the living symbol of European devotion. But in the year 1187, all the confidence built over decades, every fortress, every alliance, every vow spoken in candlelit chapels, was tested in one defining moment: the Battle of Hattin, the catastrophe that would forever divide the age of Templar glory from the age of Templar decline. To understand Hattin, we must step into the world of the Crusader states as they existed in the late 12th century. Jerusalem, though still held by Christian rulers, was weakened by internal rivalries. Kings and nobles argued over leadership. Alliances splintered. Trust was scarce. Instead of unity in the face of growing danger, the Kingdom of Jerusalem was plagued by ambition and personal conflict. European nobles born far from the Holy Land struggled to understand local politics. Meanwhile, their greatest enemy was transforming into a powerful force. For across the deserts and fertile plains of Egypt and Syria, a leader had risen whose vision was greater than any before him: Salah ad-Din Yusuf ibn Ayyub, known in the West simply as Saladin. Saladin was unlike most leaders the Templars had faced. He was patient, intelligent, and deeply spiritual, a man shaped by both humility and ambition. He understood the Templars better than any other Muslim commander. He knew their strengths: absolute discipline, fearlessness, and the charge that could shatter an army. But he also saw their weaknesses, their predictability, their rigid refusal to retreat, and their belief that God would always favor their bravery. Saladin recognized a truth many in Europe refused to see: unwavering courage is not invincible without strategy. He began unifying Muslim territories that had been divided for decades. Tribes that once fought each other now marched under one banner. Cities that once resisted his authority slowly accepted his leadership. The fractured political landscape the Crusaders had relied upon for survival began to disappear. The Crusader states, now surrounded by a single, focused enemy, stood exposed. Saladin did not rush into war. He tested the Crusaders, probing their defenses, observing their commanders, understanding their pride. And when the moment came, he struck not with overwhelming force alone, but with wisdom drawn from years of observation. In the summer of 1187, the Crusaders made a critical mistake, a mistake born from arrogance and desperation. News arrived that Saladin was besieging the city of Tiberias. To the Crusader nobles, this was a challenge to their honor. They could not allow a Muslim army to strike so deep into their territory. The King of Jerusalem, along with the Templars and Hospitallers, decided to march across the scorching plains to relieve the siege. But this decision ignored the warnings of experienced commanders. The Templars understood desert warfare, yet even they were dragged into the decision by the loud demands of men who saw battle not as strategy, but as destiny. And so the Crusader army marched, thousands of soldiers, knights in heavy armor, horses burdened by heat, with little water and poor planning, directly into Saladin's trap. Saladin's forces controlled the wells. They controlled the high ground. And they controlled the sky itself, for the sun became a weapon. He surrounded the Crusader army near a dormant volcanic formation known as the Horns of Hattin, cutting them off from the water they desperately needed. Fires were lit around them. Smoke choked the air. Fatigue shattered morale. The knights tried to force their way through enemy lines, but every attempt was crushed. The Templars and Hospitallers fought with their usual ferocity, but bravery cannot fill empty lungs or relieve burning thirst. By nightfall, the Crusader army was broken. The Templars refused to surrender. They formed shields around their banner, holding their formation even as arrows rained down from all directions. One by one they fell, exhausted, dehydrated, but still striking until the end. Chronicles describe the scene with awe: knights so weakened they could barely stand, yet still trying to raise their swords, men who collapsed only because their bodies could no longer contain their souls. When dawn rose, the red cross on white cloaks lay shattered on the sand. The defeat at Hattin was absolute. The majority of knights were killed. The rest, including many Templars, were taken prisoner. Saladin made a controversial decision: ordinary soldiers were spared, but the Templars and Hospitallers were executed. He believed that allowing such men to live would mean facing them again on the battlefield. They were not simply soldiers, they were the unbreakable core of Crusader resistance. Their elimination was both strategic and symbolic. The consequences of Hattin rippled across the medieval world like thunder. Within months, Jerusalem fell. For the first time since the First Crusade, the Holy City was again under Muslim control. The great dream that had inspired thousands to travel across continents collapsed. From the chapels of Rome to the marketplaces of France, the news was met with disbelief. Kings trembled. Priests wept. And the population asked a question that had no easy answer: had God abandoned their holy mission? For the Knights Templar, the loss of Jerusalem was more than political, it was personal. Their entire identity had been shaped by the duty to protect pilgrims traveling to the Holy City. Without Jerusalem, what was their purpose? Without the sacred destination, what meaning did their sacrifice hold? Some thought the order might fade into obscurity. But the Templars did not vanish, they adapted, as they always had. The fall of Jerusalem ignited the Third Crusade, led by the greatest monarchs of Europe: Richard the Lionheart of England, Philip II of France, and the Holy Roman Emperor. The Templars became the iron backbone of these campaigns. They were the scouts, the shock troops, the guardians of supply lines, and the trusted advisors of kings who often listened to nobody but themselves. Their relationship with Richard the Lionheart became legendary, sometimes respectful, sometimes tense. Richard admired their courage, but he feared their independence. He understood that the Templars served a mission greater than any crown. Despite the successes of the Third Crusade, Jerusalem was never fully retaken. Treaties allowed Christian pilgrims to visit the city, but it remained under Muslim control. This fragile compromise defined the new reality of the Templars. They defended the Holy Land not through conquest, but through the power of fortresses, diplomacy, and relentless vigilance. They built castles that seemed to pierce the sky: Croix de Chevaliers, Safed, Tortosa, and dozens more, fortresses designed not just to stop armies, but to withstand sieges for years. Yet beneath the surface of Templar resilience, something had changed. The order had reached its peak power, but its original mission was impossible to fulfill. The Holy City was lost, the Crusader states weakened, and the enthusiasm that had once driven Europe to fight was slowly fading. As the decades passed, kings no longer saw the Crusades as spiritual duty, but as expensive political ventures. Support for the Templars remained strong, but cracks had begun to form, cracks that would soon become fractures. The Battle of Hattin was the turning point. It was the moment when myth collided with reality, when pure devotion met the hard truth of strategy, when the unstoppable force met the immovable landscape of war. It did not destroy the Templars, but it transformed them. The brotherhood that emerged from the ashes of Hattin was older, wiser, more complex, and more politically entangled than the humble order born on the roads of Jerusalem. And though they rose again in strength, the path ahead would lead not to salvation, but to betrayal. As the dust of the Third Crusade settled and the banners of kings returned across the sea, the Knights Templar entered an era that would become both the height of their power and the beginning of their most dangerous challenges. The order stood at the peak of military discipline, economic influence, and spiritual reputation. Their castles towered over the crossroads of the Middle East like stone crowns, fortresses designed not just for the defense of land, but for the defense of belief itself. Their name evoked admiration in the hearts of pilgrims, fear in the minds of their enemies, and envy in the halls of rulers across Europe. Yet even at their zenith, forces were rising that would threaten everything they had built: the changing tides of politics, the exhaustion of a century of crusades, and the quiet resentment of monarchs who saw in the order not a sacred army, but an independent power beyond their control. By the early 13th century, the Templars had perfected the art of warfare in the Holy Land. Their castles, especially Croix de Chevaliers, became symbols of military genius, massive strongholds carved from mountainsides, layered with walls that could repel armies for years. Within these walls, the Templars practiced a life of discipline and ritual. They prayed in austere chapels with stone floors worn smooth by the knees of generations. They sharpened swords while chanting psalms. Their daily existence was a balance between contemplation and readiness, monks by dawn, warriors by noon, strategists by night. Their fortresses were not only military installations, they were centers of logistics, safe houses for travelers, granaries for food storage, stables for elite horses, and command posts from which they coordinated their entire network of garrisons. From Cyprus to Acre, from Antioch to Tortosa, the Templars developed a web of control that allowed them to respond to danger at extraordinary speed. They mastered the art of military communication, sending messages between fortresses with trained riders and coded signals. Their ships sailed the Mediterranean as extensions of their mission, carrying pilgrims, soldiers, and supplies. Templar fleets were fast, their sailors skilled, and their ports strategically placed. While many still imagine the Templars as knights on horseback riding through the desert, the reality was far more complex. They had become a naval force, a diplomatic network, and a financial power whose influence stretched from the sands of Syria to the bustling streets of Paris and London. Their financial innovations were revolutionary. The Templars managed estates across Europe, collecting income from farms, vineyards, mills, and markets. They developed systems that allowed nobles to store gold, transfer wealth safely, and finance large ventures. Kings trusted the Templars with their treasure. Crusaders used Templar credit letters to travel without carrying gold. And merchants entrusted their profits to the order's safekeeping. In many ways, the Templars had created an early form of international banking, transparent, trusted, and efficient. Yet this economic power came at a cost. It made them independent. They owed loyalty to the Pope alone, not to kings. And independence, in a world ruled by monarchs hungry for influence, is often seen as defiance. As the 13th century progressed, cracks began to appear in the unity of the Christian world. The enthusiasm that had ignited the First Crusade faded into exhaustion. Europe had spent generations sending its wealth, knights, and leaders into a battlefield thousands of miles away. But victory never lasted. Lands were won and lost. Treaties signed and broken. Families were left without heirs, kingdoms without stability. The dream of a lasting Christian kingdom in the Holy Land was slowly dissolving. People began asking the question that kings whispered behind closed doors: how many lives must be lost to hold a land that can never be secured? The downfall of the Knights Templar began not with armies marching across deserts, nor with the siege of a holy fortress, but with ink on parchment and whispers in the halls of power. Their greatest victories had come through devotion and sacrifice in the Holy Land, yet their greatest enemy waited not beyond the walls of Jerusalem, but in the very courts they once served. The Templars had survived battlefields where thousands perished, endured sieges that lasted years, and held their faith against overwhelming odds. But they were unprepared for the nature of the threat that now confronted them: a war of accusations, politics, and manipulation, a battlefield where loyalty meant nothing and truth could be buried by the weight of a king's ambition. In the year 1307, as autumn leaves fell across the valleys of France, King Philip IV, the most powerful monarch in Europe, unleashed a plan that would erase the order from history. Driven by debts he could not repay and resentment for a power he could not control, Philip sought not only to seize the Templars' wealth, but to destroy their reputation so completely that no one would speak on their behalf. At dawn on Friday, October 13th, royal agents appeared at Templar commanderies across France with sealed orders. When opened, they commanded the arrest of every Templar knight. The accusation was shocking: heresy, blasphemy, worship of false idols, corruption, and secret rituals hidden from the eyes of the Church. The charges were carefully crafted to provoke horror. Philip understood the fears of his time. In an age where the spiritual world was woven into the fabric of daily life, heresy was a stain that could erase centuries of service. The accusations spoke of rituals performed in darkness, of knights denying Christ during initiation, of strange idols worshipped in secrecy, of forbidden oaths taken in confidence. To modern eyes, such claims reveal themselves as inventions of political necessity, yet to medieval society, charged with superstition, fear, and devotion, they were terrifying. The same priests who had once praised the order now faced the whispers of blasphemy. Doubt began to spread like poison. Under torture, confessions were extracted. Men who had stood fearless against armies confessed to crimes they never committed. Iron was applied to flesh, limbs twisted, bodies broken, and minds shattered until the only path to survival was to speak the words demanded by their captors. Confessions gathered under such pain became Philip's evidence. He had not sought truth, he had manufactured it. His purpose was not justice, but destruction. When the Pope hesitated to accept these accusations, Philip relied on pressure and political manipulation, threatening the authority of the Church itself. Pope Clement V, torn between defending the order and preserving unity within Christendom, eventually conceded to the king's demands. The trials that followed were not trials in any modern sense. They were theater, designed to justify a fate already decided. The Templars were stripped of their belongings, interrogated, isolated, and humiliated. Their order was suspended, their symbols removed from public view. Entire commanderies fell silent. War horses were sold. Armories became empty halls. The once proud banners of the Bucent were taken down and hidden away. Templar brothers who had fought through decades of crusade now found themselves led in chains through city streets, the objects of scorn from people who once revered them. And everywhere the same question was whispered: how could soldiers of God betray the very faith they swore to defend? Among the most tragic figures of this era was Jacques de Molay, the last Grand Master of the Knights Templar. De Molay had joined the order as a young man, rising through its ranks with loyalty and determination. He believed in its mission, its discipline, and its sacred purpose. When the accusations were made, he was captured and subjected to the same brutal interrogations as his brothers. For a time, even he confessed under torture. But as the years passed and the truth of Philip's ambition became clear, de Molay withdrew those confessions, declaring before the Church and the people of Paris that he and his order were innocent of all charges. His words carried the weight of a dying institution. On March 18, 1314, Jacques de Molay was led to a small island on the Seine River in Paris, where a stake had been prepared. Crowds gathered to watch the spectacle. The Grand Master, once a man who commanded armies and advised kings, now stood barefoot in humble clothing, condemned as a heretic. As flames rose around him, de Molay did not cry out. Instead, he spoke a prophecy that would echo through centuries of legend. He called upon Pope Clement V and King Philip IV to meet him before God within a year and answer for their corruption. And so the story goes, within 12 months, both men were dead. In the medieval imagination, this was not coincidence, it was judgment. It fueled the mythos of the Templars as righteous men betrayed by earthly power. Their end became a moral story told through generations, that truth cannot be destroyed by lies, and that the ambitions of kings perish, while sacrifice and loyalty endure. After the execution of de Molay, the order was officially dissolved by papal decree. Their lands, castles, and gold were seized or transferred to other institutions, most notably the Knights Hospitaller, though much was quietly absorbed by nobles loyal to the crown. Their libraries were scattered, their archives vanished, and their identities erased from the records of Europe. The once mighty order became a ghost, yet history has a way of preserving what human hands try to bury. The disappearance of the Templars created a vacuum filled not by silence, but by imagination. Where facts were removed, stories took root. People whispered that the Templars had hidden great treasures, gold, relics of ancient kings, perhaps even the Holy Grail. Others believed they had discovered secrets beneath the Temple Mount, knowledge so powerful it threatened the Church itself. These legends grew because the truth of their destruction was too painful to accept, that an army of honor had been brought down by politics, not by sin reality, The legacy of the Knights Templar lies not in buried treasure or secret societies, but in their lasting impact on the world they left behind. Militarily, they changed the nature of warfare. Their discipline, training, and armored cavalry tactics influenced the armies of Europe for centuries. Their fortress designs, with layered defenses and strategic architecture, became models for castles across the continent. Economically, they pioneered systems of credit, deposit, and transfer that became the foundation of European banking. Their networks allowed wealth to move safely across borders, and their trustworthiness made them guardians of royal treasuries. Spiritually and culturally, the Templars reshaped the image of knighthood. Before the order, knights were often seen as men driven by personal glory and violent ambition. The Templars transformed the idea into something higher: the knight as servant, as protector, as warrior guided by devotion. This ideal persisted long after the order's fall, influencing literature, art, and the moral codes of noble families. Even today, the red cross on a white field remains one of the most recognized symbols in Western history, a mark that evokes courage, sacrifice, and mystery. Their influence can be traced through centuries. In the Renaissance, scholars rediscovered the stories of the Crusaders, weaving them into poems and plays. In the modern era, writers and historians revived the legends of hidden knowledge and secret rites. The Templars became symbols in novels, films, and conspiracy theories, sometimes romanticized, sometimes misunderstood, but never forgotten. They are remembered not because they vanished, but because their end was so unjust, so abrupt, and so tragic that it forced the world to remember them. And so, as the story of the Knights Templar comes to rest in your mind, remember that history is often shaped not by victory, but by the way people face defeat. The Templars stood against armies that outnumbered them, walked into darkness with faith as their lantern, and died with loyalty still burning in their hearts. Their legacy is carved not in the gold that kings stole, nor in the archives erased by decree, but in the enduring belief that courage rooted in conviction cannot be truly extinguished. Close your eyes and imagine again the silent deserts of the Holy Land, the white cloaks moving under a rising sun, the prayer whispered before battle. The Knights Templar are gone, yet their journey continues, in stories told, in stones left standing, and in the echo of their oath: not for glory, not for power, but for God.